My name is Martha Adkins. I'm one of the reference and instruction librarians here at Copley Library, and I'm a member of the Circuit Information Issues for Social Impact Committee. Our committee collaborates to provide information to members of the San Diego community via our respective libraries and through events like this. I'm here today to introduce you to our speaker, Dr. Keith Camacho. Dr. Camacho is professor and chair of the Asian American Studies Department at UCLA. Professor Camacho received his training in the anthropology, literature, and history of the Pacific Islands at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. He has also held research appointments in ethnic studies, gender studies, and native studies at the Australian National University, the University of Canterbury, the University of Illinois, and the University of Sydney. From 2014 to 2018, Professor Camacho served as the senior editor of Amerasia Journal. His research has mainly focused on Chamorro cultural and historical politics, as well as American and Japanese colonialisms and militarisms more generally. Presently, Professor Camacho is studying Samoan youth violence and justice in Auckland, Aotearoa, and Los Angeles, California. Professor Camacho joins us today to discuss his book, Reppin, Pacific Islander Youth and Native Justice. Please help me welcome Professor Camacho to the podium.
Hafide, talofa, and hello. My talk is called A Global Call for Justice, Samoan Youth Organizing in the Late 20th Century. But before I begin, I want to thank Oscar, Julian, Martha, Jaden, Holly, Sierra, the entire event staff for making this event possible. Also, I want to acknowledge the University of San Diego, the San Diego Public Library, UC San Diego Library, the All of Us Research Program, San Diego State University, San Diego County Library, the network of the National Library of Medicine, and the many great community and service providers here in San Diego. I also want to acknowledge the indigenous Kumeyaay people of this land, as well as extend my appreciation to our audience here and online for attending the resource fair and lecture. I also want to express my deep gratitude to the Samoan communities for helping me to develop my larger project on Samoan gangs. The Anesis and Carters, the Matai, Faifiao teachers, counselors, and how can I forget the OGs, the original gangsters. Every one of them is a part of this story. I thank each of you. Fafatai, fafatai lava. Indeed, I will say a few words about gangs, but today I will mainly offer a history of Samoan youth organizing in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and the United States. Specifically, I will discuss the amazing, courageous, and brilliant ways in which Samoan youth organize for racial justice, health equity, educational resources, and more in the late 20th century. I will also focus on the cities of Los Angeles and Auckland, as well as discuss how Samoan youth perceive these urban, multiracial, and I might add, indigenous places. As I show in my volume, Reppin, Pacific Islander Youth and Native Justice, Pacific Islander youth play vital roles in improving the health and well-being of communities. Whether they advocated for safer street policies, as did the K-Vibe youth pictured here to your left in Oahu, Hawaii, or whether they learned photography to affectionately represent their grandmothers, as with this award-winning photo on the right in Vanuatu. Whatever they did and whatever they're doing, Pacific Islander youth increasingly take on leadership roles in improving the health and well-being of communities. But this is not the case historically. Notwithstanding children who are born into powerful clans and genealogies, Samoans and many Pacific Islander communities do not view youth as leaders. In Samoa, for example, the Matai or chiefly system continues to govern village councils, inter-island alliances, and diasporic communities. Reflecting upon the enduring and increasing global power of the Samoan chiefly system, The scholars Fa'anofo Lisa Claire Uporesa and Adriana Maria Garriga Lopez remark, quote, although the Matai system has evolved while tied to the idea of nationhood for over 100 years, it remains a symbol and practice of Samoan sovereignty, one that precedes the era of colonization and continues throughout the Samoan Islands, reaching into diasporic communities in the United States, New Zealand, Australia, and beyond. We can add Oceanside, San Diego, we can add Carson, Compton, we can add Tacoma, we can add Salt Lake City to that list. Accordingly, Samoans rarely bestow prestige and recognition among the tamaiti or youth. As one Samoan put it, quote, children are not heard nor seen, end quote. Moreover, children, like other members of a village, support the high status of chiefs. As the sociologists Clooney McPherson and La'avasa McPherson explain, quote, Samoan culture prescribes for adolescents in a period in which they are expected to serve tautua. They are expected to serve, not challenge those who hold power over them. Adolescents are told that service is the path to power. Ole alai, le pule, ale tautua, end quote. The service is the path to power. Therefore, Samoan children learn to serve their chiefs, families, and villages in Samoa and in the diaspora. Chiefs, in turn, support them by offering resources, addressing conflict, and maintaining relations. So we have today such a global Samoan community, diasporic community. When someone has a big wedding, when there's a death in the family, all the networks go into play. Just as much as it's in the village, it's happening online, it's happening Facebook, Sydney, New Zealand, Australia, LA, all coming together simultaneously. The Samoan archipelago pictured here is located 1,800 miles north of Auckland and 4,000 miles south of Los Angeles. In 1899, Britain, Germany, and the United States tested the political reach of Samoan chiefly authority. Specifically, American, British, and German diplomats, merchants, and plantation owners competed for land leases or ownership, that is, arable land and deep-sea harbors, from which to establish their copra, sandalwood, sugar, and whaling industries in Samoa and Oceania. To give you a sense of like 1700s, 1800s Oceania, a lot of people, whether they're German migrants, whether they're Scottish or Irish, whether they're coming from the Iberian Peninsula, Spain, Portugal, when they're coming into the region, they're coming as visitors. So they're brokering with people. How can I protect my fellow German citizen? How can I support my fellow British merchant trader? How can we establish Christianity? All these different things are at play in and around these indigenous communities. In the western part of Samoa, here to your left, the Americans and Europeans found in Apia, a port town from which to leverage their interests. And in the eastern part of Samoa, on the east to your right, the Americans saw Pongo Pongo as a valuable harbor from which to provision U.S. commercial and military vessels during their voyages between the U.S. and China, Japan, the Philippines. I was talking to some of your librarians, the great librarians of San Diego and the university here, and Herman Melville in Taipei and Moby Dick discussed these things in his novels. He discussed the predicament of the U.S. In the Pacific. Like, what is the U.S. doing Pacific? What's France doing in the Pacific? How are they? That's the dilemma. The dilemma was less on the indigenous people. It was more on Americans and Europeans, like what, who, when, where, and why in the region. So, I plug Herman Melville, given that we're in a library, and I'll plug other library materials as well. To settle these disputes between European and Samoans, Britain, Germany, and the United States codified the Berlin Act of 1899, an agreement that placed the western part of Samoa under German rule and the eastern section of Samoa under U.S. naval governance. After World War I and the dissolution of the German Empire, the League of Nations, the predecessor of the United Nations, the League of Nations, then allowed New Zealand to administer Western Samoa in 1914. Western Samoa then gained independence from New Zealand in 1962. In Eastern Samoa, however, the U.S. retained its sovereignty and allowed Samoans to work for the U.S. Navy and related agencies. So, in other words, we have two Samoas. For me, there's only one, but there's really two now. On the west, independent state of Samoa, and on the east, American Samoa, a U.S. territory. Puerto Rico, territory. Saipan, Guam, territory. Oregon, California, Washington, all previous territories. The only difference is the insular cases in the turn of the 20th century decided, the Supreme Court, that these territories in Oceania and the Pacific would not become a full part of the United States. And so this is why the congressional representatives in the Caribbean and the Pacific cannot vote in Congress. And this is why people born and raised there cannot vote for president. So these are some of the kind of like ongoing inequities and injustices, even just at the citizen electoral level. The Fita Fita Guard, as illustrated in this photo of Seaman Second Class George Peters, symbolize the U.S. government's efforts to militarize what is now called American Samoa. Mainly comprised of young men, the Fita Fita also represented some of the first Samoans to migrate from American Samoa to Hawaii and California in the 1950s. On December 24, 1951, for example, the acting governor of American Samoa, John Elliott, wrote to Congressional Representative Fred Crawford about an upcoming visit to Washington, D.C. In his letter, acting Governor Elliott also included a Samoan song that conveyed the aspirations of hundreds of Samoans to join the U.S. military and to travel the world. Translated into English, the song, "Wake Up, Samoan Boys," depicted Samoan youth views of the Department of Interior, their home in Samoa, the port city of Honolulu, and the vital significance of Atua, or God. The song read in part, "Samoan boys, wake up. You have attained success. The government of the interior is sponsoring the volunteers. Pray that our loyalty be materialized. We desire to go to Honolulu. Do not forget Samoa, its culture and folklore. Samoa, my beloved country, may you, my dear, be successful. You must be brave and place your trust in God." In another letter dated January 5, 1953, the High Chief Tufele Faia Onga elaborated upon the relationship between the U.S. military and the ambition of Samoan youth to reside and work in Hawaii. He said, quote, "The invasion of Samoan shores by the armed forces during World War II, the introduction of new ideas and Western luxuries, and the great influence of the American movie have all contributed toward this new burning ambition among the youth for a new change of life," end quote. The editors of Samoa Ne, a publication produced by the High School Alumni Association, captured the fervor by which Samoan youth attempted to leave American Samoa for a new change of life. The article stated, "To you who are in the colleges and universities in Honolulu and the United States, to you who are in the armed forces, and to those of you who are working as civilians, to you we say, mahalo, tamawhai, good try. In the eyes of Samoa's young, you are the pioneers, the explorers of a new world of knowledge and understanding," end quote. The Fita Fita, these enlisted men in the Navy and their families, also migrated to districts in Los Angeles County, Carson, Compton, Long Beach. In 1972, the American Samoan government estimated that 500 people left every year for LA and other cities that hosted bases, Germany, South Korea, Japan. In California, Samoans also live near churches among working-class African-American and Mexican-American communities. Some Samoan fathers and grandfathers also became pastors or faifiao for many churches. Here's a map of LA to Vanguard. But the Samoans knew little to nothing about the indigenous people, the Tongva Gabrielino, nor did Samoans know much about Tavangar and other important sites for the Tongva and California Indians. With their ties to the U.S. military and its highly disciplined environment, many Samoans also struggled to understand the histories of protests among Tongva, Black, and Latino communities of LA. As a result, Samoan youth, especially teenage men, but also young women, had to negotiate the challenging world of a sprawling urban metropolis. Worse, an entire industry of educators, journalists, policymakers, and others represented Samoans as a society comprised of gang members, athletes, soldiers, and performers. Physicality, entertainment, brute strength, deviance, it seemed. All of these appeared to constitute what it meant to be a Samoan. With respect to gangs, for instance, the New York Times noted in 1988 that, quote, LA County is the gang capital of the nation. Most of the gangs are Black or Hispanic, but there are Asian, Samoan, and white ones as well, end quote. In response to the racism and violence of the government, media, and schools, the Service for Asian American Youth emerged in 1978 to support Samoans, other Pacific Islanders, and Asian Americans in Los Angeles. In their monthly newsletter, Cricket, they explain that they seek to develop a better understanding and appreciation of the relationships between Asian Pacific people, that's their phrase, between Asian Pacific people and peoples from all racial and ethnic groups. While they provided services for parents and the elderly, they also worked very closely with students. They stated, quote, we are concerned with students of any ethnic background. We also have counselors adept in various Asian Pacific languages to bridge the gap, which is essential for total communication between counselor and counselee, end quote. They also distributed information about the civil rights of individuals, featured programs about the US government's incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II, and protested the policing and imprisonment of youth of color in LA County. Given that youth constituted their primary audience, the Service for Asian American Youth also organized many fun activities, as with a car wash at the Sumimoto Bank lot or a roller skating party at the Shamrock Skate Arena pictured here. 1970s, if you said the word shakies, I'm there. You feel me? So you can tell their clever outreach is not only nerdy things that we librarians and staff and the general public like, it's also those, heavily infused spiced potatoes and pizzas and complex carbs our doctors tell us to shy away from, right? One of their youth workers and writers, Mabel Moelata Sialoi, identified as a Samoan student at Mount St. Mary's College and described her reasons for studying sociology in the 70s. She explained, quote, I plan to use my BS degree in social problems within the Asian Pacific community. However, I should feel that I should deal more with the youth, helping them to deal with the harsh urban society today, end quote. In this regard, Mabel may have supported the Omai Fatasi, O-M-A-I-F-A glottoscope, A-T-A-S-I, Omai Fatasi program at Central High School in Carson. In the Samoan language, Omai Fatasi can mean unity or come together. Sponsored by the Service for Asian American Youth, this program offered personal and family counseling, job training and placement, and general education development certificate preparation for Asian American and Pacific Islander youth who decided not to complete their high school education. In the newsletter, they use the word dropout. I just put down who decided not to complete their high school education. Rick Bonus just came out of a book on this subject of students who choose to leave the university system, why they left the university system, how the university failed them, all those different things. So they had services for high school kids as well. Given its focus on mental health, the Omai Fatasi program helped the youth to establish a positive image of themselves, an educational objective that appeared decades ahead of its time. A lot of the new literature on mental health, on services that we see in the university and the public space is all about our mental health. They were already thinking of those things in the 70s and 80s. With its origin as a social club with United Samoan Organization, Omai Fatasi later became its own organization that extended into the schools and other public spaces. Reflecting on her time with Omai Fatasi, Kolokea Foisia discussed their dress, style, and philosophy. She remarked, quote, "We had Afro hairdos. That was part of the expression. Again, it was whatever that the hippie movement, that type of thing. We also began to read a little bit about Karl Marx and Malcolm X. Some of the children were believing in that philosophy," end quote. In his memoir, Activist, the Japanese-American community leader, Warren Furatani, revealed that his father, Chuck, had also supported Omai Fatasi. As Warren noted, quote, "His dad got a job working with gang youth in West Long Beach. He did youth and school counseling with Chican Vatos. While building his street cred with them, he got introduced to Samoan gang members. His work with them really struck a nerve." Furatani continued, "Through Omai Fatasi, my father identified, nurtured, and learned from the leaders in the community, those established by way of the Matai system, the church, and where those community culture organizations connected with overlapped or butted heads with mainstream society. These folks relied on my dad as a resource to facilitate, interpret, and push when necessary for their rights and needed services." In recognition of the solidarity between Samoans and Asian Americans, Densho, the Japanese-American Legacy Project, listed Omai Fatasi in their chronology of the Asian American social movement, as pictured here next to the red arrow. So we have here in this chronology going back to the 50s of Asian American social movement, Omai Fatasi. There's also a Tongan church group that appears in the later years, but part of this broader Asian American movement. After World War II, a small number of Samoans from Western Samoa also began to migrate south to New Zealand, and much like their relatives from American Samoa, like they traveled north to Hawaii and California. In moving to Auckland or Tamaki Makaurau, the Samoans from Western Samoa also pursued educational opportunities. But unlike their cousins in the Fita Fita and the US Navy, they did not follow a military path. Along with other immigrants from Asia, the Pacific, the Netherlands, and the UK, most Samoans from Western Samoa actually worked in factories. John Tunui, a Cook Islander born and raised in New Zealand, recalled how his relatives pursued manual labor in the timber industries. Back then, he said, New Zealand recruited, quote, cheap labor and non-militant, subservient, and humble laborers. That was the perception of all Polynesian workers in those days. They didn't join unions. They didn't stand up to their bosses, end quote. Many Samoans held similar beliefs for fear of losing their work or school visas, or not simply knowing how to navigate hostile environments, work environments. In fact, both the indigenous Maori being the native people of Aotearoa, New Zealand, both the Maori and Samoans arrived in Auckland around the same time in the 50s. Most cities, Auckland, Christchurch, Otago, Wellington in New Zealand were former British settlements, bringing in, there's a thriving lamb industry now. This is all through British settlements from the 1800s. Most of those cities were exclusively white European, but turn of the 20th century, 1950s, 60s, Auckland experiences major manufacture boom. And they're recruiting cheap labor, quote unquote, from the countryside, Maori, and from Samoa, their former territory. So they have Maori and Samoans coming into these predominantly working class neighborhoods in Auckland at the same time. To demonstrate their familiarity with each other, these buildings here to your left, Maori Hall and to your right, Pacific Islands Presbyterian Church Halls, literally face each other in a small street off Karangahape Road, also known as K Road. And it's these little churches and halls in the 50s or 60s that were bringing in Maori and Samoans at the same time, helping them with the English language, helping them find jobs, helping them get their contracts written and put forward, and moving them into different housing spaces. They literally face each other. In 1961 or 1950s, I think the Samoans in the 1950s in Auckland were barely 600, 700 scholarship recipients. By 1961, they numbered almost 7,000, and by 1996, the Samoans in New Zealand, over 100,000. In my interview with the educator Joe Diamond of the Ngāpuhi Maori tribe, she discussed what Auckland, a place of big flashy signs, meant to her in the 60s. She said, quote, "When I first came to Auckland as a child, we went to South Auckland because that's where our relatives live, and we were visiting on our way out north. To my last remaining grandfather's funeral, or tangi. So very early on, we get the sense that Auckland is a place with relatives, but also a drop-off place on our wayside journey going north to our tribal community in Hokinga Harbor." End quote. Aotearoa, New Zealand is a beautiful country. The people are beautiful. The landscape is beautiful. If you ever get a chance, meet Joe, meet the folks there. It's a great place to visit. As such, Joe Diamond described South Auckland and the wider area as our city, but she also respected that Auckland belongs to the Ngāti Whātua, Tainui, and other Maori tribes, communities that have gained increasing economic and political authority by way of the Treaty of Waitangi and their nearly 2-century-long relationship with the Crown and the government. The Treaty of Waitangi was signed by most Maori chiefs in 1840 between them and the Crown. It's a binding treaty. So unlike the treaties in U.S. federal Indian law, this treaty really distributes power between the indigenous Maori and everybody else, right? So a lot of things, health policy, education, water rights, right? All these things, maternal care, library acquisitions, all these things go in and out of the Treaty of Waitangi, making sure that Maori, the indigenous Maori, and Europeans, Asians, there's also a large African diaspora coming in, other Pacific Islanders are all working and negotiating everyday society. At the same time, Auckland is becoming this metropolis in the 60s, 70s, arts, industry, technology. But like LA, the police, schools, and media represent Maori and Samoans as black, criminal, and particularly and poor in the post-war period, but even up to the present. As the Samoan scholar Melanie Anai asserts, the general public in New Zealand often referred to Maori, Samoans, and other Pacific Islanders as, quote, coconuts, black bastards, or bloody islanders. So we have anti-black sentiment circulating in the Atlantic world from the slave trade, but you also see it coming down the English route to Aotearoa, New Zealand, where people are expressing these anti-black feelings to an indigenous community that have black and brown skin, right? How did Samoan youth experience the migration from Western Samoa to Aotearoa, New Zealand? What did they think of the Maori, another Pacific Islander community, and the Pākehā, or white Europeans? And how did youth organize for justice in Auckland? How did the Samoan youth organize for justice when just a few years ago in 1962, their country had gained independence from New Zealand? Remember, the Samoans migrating from Apia in Western Samoa are going down into Auckland as independent citizens. New Zealand citizens, Samoans, some of them bi citizens. And that's through the case study. You can have a Samoan passport and a New Zealand passport, but essentially independent. But the pathway north from American Samoa is a military pathway. U.S. nationals, some pathway to citizenship, but it's through a military circuit. It's not like you're part of the United Nations family. You're not in international space, right? Vera Anisi, a Samoan teenager whose family migrated to New Zealand in the 50s, had this to say, quote, "In many ways, I don't know a lot about my past. I love to sit down and hear mom and dad talk about their childhood. I've learned a lot by having cousins come and stay, but I think I have been lucky to be brought up here. I feel more like an individual. I have been able to look at the Samoan way and the European and select the things I like from both, and then I put them together, and I've got me," end quote. Vera's comments, however, reflected the ideal situation. This text I'm pulling is from a primary source called Welcome the Anisis. Welcome to the Anisis. It's a pamphlet that the US government put together in the 70s, late 70s, to accommodate teachers in the school system to the Samoan migrants. So they bring in these idealized situations. It's not a utopia. They do talk about challenges, but I just want to give you context into like why they might select, Vera's comments. For the most part, Samoan youth during the time of Vera and on faced tremendous challenges, no less the relentless policing of their neighborhoods and their overall exclusion from higher education and other resources. In my interviews of former Samoan and Maori original gangsters in Auckland, for example, many of them mentioned that the New Zealand police often verbally harassed them on the streets when they were kids. So they'd be walking down K Road, be walking down Mangere, and the police would pull over and start berating them. "What are you doing? Why are you out here?" Just yelling at them, all kinds of racial slurs. So when the police physically assaulted these Samoan and Maori young adults, as they did in the back of police vans and in the prison cells of police stations, their dehumanization, and this is their words, appeared like fistfights. They appeared like fistfights. I talked to these guys, they're like, "Yeah, we had a good fist fight, Keith. We had a good punch up," right? It appeared as fist fight. The dehumanization was so deep, it was a fist fight and not an outright violation of their civil rights as citizens in New Zealand. In this regard, the New Zealand government, media, and wider public perceive Samoan youth as a racial problem, given that many of them participated in gangs like the King Cobras, Stormtroopers, and much later in the 90s, Bloods and Crips. Recognizing the obstacles that many youth encounter in Aotearoa, the National Youth Council distributed award monies to community, religious, and private organizations in the youth field. Reflecting its prominent stature, the National Youth Council or NYC in New Zealand registered up to 350,000 members. These are all youth, registered up to 350,000 youth in 72. So, we talk about outreach. We were talking about outreach earlier today of Oscar and Martha and folks, Julianne. It's incredibly hard to get people into different spaces, whether it's a library, whether it's a community program, right? 350,000 people in 1972. In this fiscal year alone, the National Youth Council, NYC, also allocated over $12,000 to many organizations. In 2024, that's over 100K, right? Allocated over 12,000 to many orgs. The Girls Brigade, the Scout Association, the Young Christian Workers, the Youth Hostel Association, and the Young Men's Christian Association, among many others, received funding. The NYC also provided funds for these kids and adults to attend international conferences at the UN in South Africa, Indonesia, on apartheid, on women's rights, on all these things, right? Outward, the National Youth Council appeared progressive, global, inclusive. Internally, however, the NYC struggled. Their leadership struggled. They questioned, should we give funding directly to the Maori youth orgs? I think they understand culture and youth differently, right? We also have concerns about how they do protests. Protests should be lawfully, right? So this is what's happening internally in the leadership, right? Our progressive, et cetera, but I don't know. And the question of Auckland, right? Should we give money to Auckland? These matters came to the fore when the Auckland Regional Youth Council boycotted the annual meeting of the National Youth Council in 1970. In a letter to the NYC, Ian Shirley, the chairman of the Auckland Youth Council, asserted, quote, "The concept of a youth council in New Zealand is a stereotype one that is not geared to the needs of the young people of this country. Because the government, conventional youth organizations, and the community all have preconceived ideas of what a youth council should be, they have restricted their membership to the established youth organizations with little or no attempt to look outside of their little world, end quote. Shirley continued saying, quote, then the more radical groups, like the progressive youth movement, socialist groups, and so on, are opposed by the National Youth Council, end quote. In response, during this foray, there was media coverage. And the media is like, shame on the NYC. Why is the NYC not accommodating Auckland? Because Auckland is brown, right? Auckland is all these Maori kids. All these kids in the street, their mom and dad are working in the factories. There's no middle-class sensibility here. There's like multi-generational households, so they're struggling. So these are all the things that are popping up in the media. I think because of all that pressure, the boycott, the media, et cetera, the NY leadership had to come to terms with their contradictory policies. That is, how can the NYC function as an open-minded and forward-thinking platform in the international arena, but practice exclusionary policies at home? Given its large Maori and Samoan population, they had to grapple with those negative racial stereotypes. In the end, the NYC changed its position and provided funding to the Auckland Regional Council, brought them in, and one of the orgs that benefited from the funds, which is the last part of my talk today, is the Polynesian Panther movement. The Polynesian Panther movement in 1972 represented one of these orgs to receive financial support. Specifically, they received an award in the amount of $100 New Zealand to organize a 2-week leadership summit at a marae, a Maori sacred space, where Maori youth could learn more about their culture and traditions. Here is, they also advocated for housing justice. For many decades in Auckland, and this is a public health political issue for many decades, a lot of the working class communities don't have really good insulation, and Auckland and New Zealand is what we call wet winters. So extremely high cases of pneumonia and a lot of infant deaths and really bad sinus lung issues because of mold and because of wet housing conditions. And so the Polynesian Panther here, this is a photo of them in front of the house. That's one of the things they were advocating for, among many, many other things. Food programs, education, etc. Interestingly, the Polynesian Panther movement from the beginning involved many gang members, Samoan, Niuean, Tokelau, and Tongan gang members, move into this structure of a movement and then became its own political party as well. They actually had political party at the National Party, Labour Party, just independent party, even moving into politics. They were also critical of the monocultural justice system, a system that operated on the assumed superiority of white racism and legal traditions in New Zealand. Reflecting on this legacy, co-founder Will Ililohia, a Tongan born and raised New Zealander, observed, quote, "That's why we set up the Polynesian Panthers. We read about what the Black Panthers were doing through and then realized that apart from the US constitutional right of carrying a gun, it was very similar. So we actually adapted their program for our work here in Aotearoa. And that's how we set up the Polynesian Panthers. And it was a time when globally, young people were starting to speak out." In speaking up, though, Will noted that his parents never supported his activism, even questioning his rights to protest. Milani Anai, Samoan co-founder, also confirmed, saying, "Our parents used to call us moipi, which means bedwetters. We were just kids, We were really intent on making change for our communities," right? As she explained, her parents worked in the factory 6 days a week. She rarely saw her family. She only got a chance to talk to her dad in church. And for this reason, Milani and Polynesian Panthers, quote unquote, became their voice. In Samoa, children are not heard, nor are they seen. They are taught to serve Tautua, the chiefs of their villages in Upolu, Savai'i, and Tutuila, further afar in Tamaki, Makoro, Tavangar, and closer at home in the digital world of Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. But as I've briefly discussed, the Samoan youth of the late 20th century transformed what it meant to be a Samoan, a young Samoan, and a young Samoan committed to justice. But rather than be restricted by the popular prejudices about rebellious children or dangerous teenagers, the Samoan youth began to open up new spaces for creativity, health, and well-being in the cities of Auckland and Los Angeles. Indeed, they have been amplifying their understanding of service and critically merging Tautua, service, with the philosophies and practices of African American, Asian American, Maori, and other indigenous and immigrant peoples in New Zealand and the US. More compellingly, they have been redefining a new global meaning for young people, namely that service might, in fact, constitute an inclusive and accommodating way to achieve local forms of justice worldwide. Unlike older meanings of youth that stem from the European labor industrial revolution, or the more widespread belief that young people don't know what they're doing, can't navigate, right? We hear that a lot. You don't know what you're doing. You haven't been there, done that. You know, I'm saying we as in old people, right? I'm speaking for some old people, not all old people, right? You know, like, what do you think you're doing? You know what I'm saying? Those are deep-rooted things. However, the Samoan youth organizers briefly featured here show that collective forms of service represent a new category of young people. That young people can be equated with collective service, and that service can be equated with young people. As this Maori-inspired mural in Auckland illustrates, whakaako kia whakaora, educate to liberate. Tsuduas masi whawhatai lava, and thank you. This is my conclusion. I'm happy to welcome any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Camacho, just for the history, just learning more about Pacific Islander youth and the Native justice movements. I am curious, though, like thinking about this anthology, can you speak to the reason why it was so important to you that the articles in this anthology were not just written about Native youth or Pacific Islander youth, but they were written in collaboration? Like, why was that so important to you?
Thank you, Oscar. So Oscar's question is, why was it important for me in putting together this anthology that I was very sensitive of bringing academics into this space who work with youth? All the folks in this anthology work with youth in some capacity: houseless youth, incarcerated youth, youth and the elderly, youth and technology, right? Youth in the diaspora, hip-hop artists, all these different youth. And I think a lot of it has to do with I've always had those sensibilities, Oscar, but I think it had a lot to do, increasingly over the years, me really trying to put theory into practice. So even that's always been my ethos. I've always challenged myself, how can I bring what we learn in this beautiful campus that is University of San Diego? How can we tangibly translate the things we do and learn in the school space collectively and bridge that thing that is the community and the publics together, right? And for me as a teacher and now an administrator, my question is how can I scale that up? How can I reach all kinds of people, and how can all kinds of people reach us? So I think it's those sensibilities and me just being more cognizant. I'm not saying that the typical academic is not a good academic. That's great. I'll nerd out on books all day. But I think with this anthology, I was very intentional in thinking alongside people who work with youth. Chapter 2, for some folks who want to pick up a copy, Chapter 2 is co-written by an incarcerated Tongan in Salt Lake. And a lot of other chapters are written in conjunction with different youth orgs in the Pacific and also the US. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Camacho. You mentioned about children not being seen and not being heard. And I wonder, how do these kids grow up to be youth and be empowered? You know, like whether it's, you know, their education, their literacy, and just be, you know, like members of the society. How are they empowered and how do they exercise their power to reclaim that?
What's your name?
Oh, my name is Regina Gong. I work here and I'm also a librarian at Copley.
Thank you, Regina. So Regina's question is like, what are the ways in which young people empower themselves, become empowered, put into practice? In the cases here, I think print journalism, having access to print journalism, seeing your words in print, working collaboratively, right? Journalism, investigative journalism, that kind of outreach. Some of the gang members that get involved in Omai Fatasi and also the Polynesian Panthers, you know, they're like, what, you want to hear from me? You actually want my opinion? Like, what, you want me to talk about why my house has mold? And I thought that was normal. And, you know, and so the minute a lot of the young people across the board, the minute you start giving them access to all kinds of knowledge, and you really feature their thinking, anything is possible. Like, I've taught in high school, middle school, I've taught in the streets, taught in churches and stuff like that. And young people, all of them are brilliant, you know? And even the ones with the toughest exterior has a lot to say and share. And once you give them those resources, what those resources might be, they just incredible. They just go, anybody can do that. So I think in these cases in LA and Auckland, it's other young people working with them and for them, and seeing that mutual empowerment in each other, and having active concrete gains, you know, policy gains. In the anthology, one chapter talks about Cave Vibe, you know, and it's a bunch of, you know, initially it was about, let's put together kids and, you know, on the street and have them repair bikes, and they can keep a bike if they put in X amount of repair hours. So, you know, there's 2 or 3 kids in Kalihi in Honolulu who don't have bikes, and they see their friends pass by the bikes and they feel sad. They're like, oh, come here. We teach you how to do repairing bikes. But a lot of outreach is not about the bikes, right? It's about teaching the kids self-confidence. It's teaching them open mind, open heart, all those things. Those same kids in that chapter advocated with state legislators and council members to advocate for safer streets for pedestrians and bicyclists in that part of Kalihi, right? And so there's this idea that young people are without agency. Everybody has agency, right? And so these are some of the things. But no, great question, you know.
Cool. Hello, my name is Arlene Nagtalan. I'm a 4th-year undergraduate student at UC San Diego. I'm also working with the San Diego Unified School District as part of their ethnic studies and youth advocacy departments. And so I really appreciate your talk today and empowering Pacific Islander youth and just this topic in general. One of my main projects I'll be taking on this school year is forming an Asian Pacific Islander Desi American student board representing the district. And it's an incredibly huge endeavor that I'm honestly really scared to tackle, but I know is very necessary so that APITA voices, at least within the San Diego Unified School District, feel heard. And I guess my question for you is, as somebody who feels as if my K-12 education wasn't enough in learning more about my cultural identity and my background, and only now having the resources to learn about my cultural heritage in university, how do I provide those same experiences and opportunities to folks in K-12 who want to learn more about their roots?
Great question. So thank you, Arlene. Thank you for you know, your question. And I always joke with my students, you know, I teach at UCLA now, but if I went to UC San Diego or UCLA or University of San Diego, the first few days or weeks, I would have dropped out. Because the only 2 skills I knew when I was a teenager was, you know, how to play basketball, my flip-flops, and how to throw rocks at savage boonie dogs in Guam and the islands. So great question. I think anytime we work policy, who are those administrators and teachers and people around you that want to support you, first of all? Who are they? Work with them, right? And find, and the other thing is when you're working with multi-ethnic, multi-religious spaces, there's a lot of affinity and focus on the core shared strengths. Don't think about some of the more challenging things. What are the things that you all like, right, in the curriculum, et cetera? At the Asian American Studies Center, we're right now developing a multimedia textbook that's going to be open and online, accessible for free. We're already starting we've been working with LAUSD and teachers and librarians and even high school and middle school kids, and they're telling us, I don't understand a hell what you're saying. I don't understand anything. And so we have to go back and recalibrate. So we're co-authoring all these modules with high school teachers, middle school teachers, people that are doing lesson plans. This is rolling out and should be live in the next 2-3 years. Karen Uemoto at UCLA is the lead person, and Kelly Fong, those two. But it's going to be accessible. I think the goal is to fundraise and make it accessible in perpetuity. So Filipino American studies, Indonesian studies, Samoan, Chamorro, Hawaiian, Cambodian, Thai, the range of the diversity of Asian American and Pacific Islander. It's in progress, and we hope to keep building on it. So even though it's not going to be a fixed model, we want to keep working with teachers, but it's going to be out there, and it's going to be. I think the way they're framing it is each module has 4 or 5 sections where teachers can draw from and lesson plans, and just like a textbook. So, but yes, I'm happy to introduce you to Karen if you want to get plugged into their team, because they're always looking for ways to improve. You can even be like an advisor and tell them what we're doing right or wrong. Seriously, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Tracy. Thank you so much for this presentation. It was really informative, and I really appreciate you uplifting like other youth voices. I think it's really hard as a youth to like get more allies that are not just youth, and it's great to see that in these spaces. My question is, you covered like a vast amount of communities in your book. Like, what was it like, the process like doing the outreach to all of these communities, and like how you were able to like kind of accumulate all of these stories?
So Tracy's question is, how was I able to work with all these different communities in the Pacific, like through these authors? Okay, so I think, well, one, I'm just a liaison. I'm just an editor. The folks in the anthology are the ones on the ground really doing the important work. But I feel whenever we do collective endeavors, whether it's an anthology like this, or you want to do an outreach project at La Jolla at UC San Diego, you're working with Arlene, it's finding those people that mutually have shared goals. But I also think in this case, my training in Pacific history helped me. When I went to University of Hawaii, I was in classrooms with people from Tahiti and in Vanuatu, New Zealand, and it really tested my ignorance and my racism and prejudice about the region. Much in the way that now that I live in California, I've educated myself about the rich diversity of people from indigenous Americas to African American migration during the war period in the munitions factories, to Jewish American history in the cities, to all these things. And so I feel coming with some of that knowledge about the region firsthand and being sensitive to that was helpful. And then just knowing that this was an opportunity to also reward the anthology. So some of the people there it's not a typical book. Usually books are just pure academics, someone with a PhD. At the time of that publication, I think there's like 2 or 3 people that didn't even finish their degrees. But I would help them as an editor, what do you think about this word, and how can I support you, and mentor them into those spaces. Yeah, but great question, and we look forward to your book in the next few years.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Dr.
Oscar.
Camacho. Yeah.